Imagine you want to read the private journals of one of history's greatest scientists. You travel to a library in Paris, but the librarian stops you. Before you can look inside, you have to sign a waiver. Written over a century ago, these pages are still emitting dangerous levels of radiation. To safely store them today, they must be kept sealed in heavy lead-lined boxes just to block the energy. Looking at these notebooks, you see pages crammed with dense data and calculations. This is the sheer volume of intellectual output required to decode the invisible world. To hold one of these journals is to hold raw, living energy. It is a physical reminder of a life defined by manipulating forces no one else could see or control. In 1867, Maria Sklodowska was born into a Poland that technically didn't exist. The Russian Empire occupied Warsaw, actively suppressing the population by banning the Polish language and history from schools. For Maria, the local university was strictly closed to women. In Warsaw at that time, women were barred from higher education regardless of their academic ability. So she and her friends found a workaround. They joined the Floating University, an underground, secret school that constantly changed locations to avoid the Russian police. To afford real university training, she spent 5 years working as a governess, sending her salary to her sister in Paris. When Maria finally arrived in Paris herself in 1891, she survived in a freezing room, often eating nothing but bread and chocolate. She powered through that extreme deprivation to graduate at the absolute top of her physics class. She had the genius. Now she needed a mystery worthy of it. Enter Marie Curie, a quiet physicist who became her intellectual partner. When they married, Marie wore a dark blue dress instead of white, a practical choice so she could wear it straight back into the laboratory. This is the laboratory where they worked, a cold, damp, leaky shed. Here, surrounded by primitive wooden tables and simple glass equipment, they investigated mysterious, invisible rays that a scientist named Henri Becquerel had recently observed. Marie proved these invisible rays weren't a chemical reaction between two materials. Instead, this energy was pulsing from the core of the atom itself. She combined the Latin word radio with activity to name it, radioactivity. By proving that atoms were not inert building blocks but active sources of energy, she challenged the core assumptions of 19th century physics. Proving that theory required brutal physical labor. Year after year, Marie stood in that dark shed, stirring tons of ordinary rock called pitchblende by hand, trying to extract a microscopic amount of proof. Eventually, they isolated 2 entirely new elements. The first she named polonium. It was a defiant statement, declaring to the international community that her occupied homeland of Poland still mattered. The second element was radium. In the darkness of their freezing lab, it produced an eerie, continuous blue glow, visible proof of invisible work. In 1903, the scientific community officially recognized this labor by awarding her the Nobel Prize in Physics, making her the first woman receiving the honor. Her immense, grueling physical sacrifice in a dark shed directly birthed a glowing element that captured global attention. But in 1906, tragedy struck. On a rainy, crowded Paris street just like this one, Pierre was struck by a fast-moving horse-drawn carriage and killed instantly. Marie absorbed the grief and stepped into his vacant teaching position. By doing so, she became the first female professor at the prestigious Sorbonne. 5 years later, she won a second Nobel Prize, this time in chemistry. Yet incredibly, the French Academy of Sciences voted to deny her entry as a member by a single vote, simply because of her gender. Despite global acclaim, she navigated a world that constantly told her she didn't belong. Her response was to rely entirely on the absolute, undeniable truth of her data. When the First World War broke out, she refused to wait safely behind a desk. Instead, she designed mobile X-ray units, known as petite curies, to take directly to the front lines. She personally drove these vehicles into combat zones and trained nurses to use the radiation to locate shrapnel and broken bones inside wounded soldiers, ultimately treating over 1 million men. This massive wartime effort proved that radiation had crucial medical viability. It laid the direct groundwork for modern radiotherapy and the medical treatments used in oncology today. These early observations in her Paris shed provided the essential technical basis for modern radiotherapy and oncology. But the cost of this understanding was absolute. In 1934, Marie Curie died of aplastic anemia. Decades of unprotected exposure to the very radiation she discovered had slowly destroyed her bone marrow. She left behind a legacy of breaking barriers, an element on the periodic table bearing the name of her homeland, and an entire branch of science that vastly outlived her. Marie Curie illuminated the dark by giving up her own energy. She proved that relentless curiosity and immense courage can advance humanity, but